Everybody ready? So I slightly moved the cell phone here. I don't know whose it is. Kristen, you want to make sure it's okay?
Yeah, I'm having audio issues. Oh, that's fine.
It's all right?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you all for being here. This is the District Attorney's Office's regular Monday press conference. Just a note, there will not be a press conference on Labor Day, as I'm sure you might imagine. Obviously, if there are any important developments, as always, we will be doing press availabilities, press conferences, and fielding questions in relation to any particular events. We will be speaking today about a particular case involving the murder of a 2-year-old child, where we have already achieved not only a conviction but a sentencing. But it's an important case because I think it speaks to some of the terrible concerns that we have for infants and for children who may be at danger of child abuse. At the end of this conference, we will make sure to provide the DHS child line number, where people who may suspect child abuse can report 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order to have those suspicions investigated. And I hope everyone will take advantage of that number. I'd like to acknowledge some of the people who are here today. We have Chesley Lightsey, who is the Chief of the Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. We have Robert Listenby, who is the First Assistant in the DA's office. We have with us today ADA Nora Greenberg, who is the Homicide and Non-Fatal, who is in the Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. ADA Greenberg did a tremendous job in the case of Commonwealth versus Jediah Nesmith, which is the case that we will be discussing after we complete our gun violence update. And we also have with us today Reverend Myra Maxwell, who is the director of the DAO CARES Unit. The CARES Unit, as you know, provides intensive services to the families of victims of homicide during the first 45 days. And we are all available here to answer questions from the media. Let me turn first to our update on gun violence. Homicides year to date, and understand we always do this in 7-day periods, so I'm speaking now of the period from August the 21st through August the 27th. Homicides to date, 355. This date last year there were 300. That is an increase of 18%. Obviously this is terrible. It continues to be terrible. We had 7 homicides during that time period, 34 non-fatal shootings. And also during this period, there were 210 gun or gun violence incidents. 88 arrests were made by law enforcement, and of those 88 arrests, the DA's office opened cases in 85 of those arrests. I do think it's important to keep an eye on the long-term trends here, because there is hope, and it's important that we recognize that. I would say about 5 or 6 weeks ago, we were up 38% as compared to the prior year. We are now up 18%. And we have seen that shift with a number of weeks when the total homicides were 3, or they were 5, or in this week they are 7. Obviously, 0 is the number that we would like, ideally. But I say that just so you can keep track. There has been a pretty steady rate of an average of 1.5 homicides per day during the pandemic period, by which I mean since March of 2020, 1.5 homicides per day. So your average week would be 10.5. And we have seen a number of weeks recently when it was 5 or it was 3, or in the instance of this week, it was 7. Does that mean something? Well, it doesn't mean much, honestly, because we need to wait a longer period of time. We need to see some cause and effect to really understand what's going on. But I do not think it's surprising that we are starting to see this during time periods when society is opened up more than it was 6 months ago, when we have experienced the opening of some of the archdiocese schools, and now we're seeing the opening of some of the public schools, when we have seen more availability of rec centers in certain areas. We are seeing people who are able to remain employed, have a steady income. A lot of the factors that were so damaging to the prevention of gun violence earlier during the pandemic are reduced at this point. We can only hope that some of the positive trends that we are seeing will continue. Is it good enough? Of course not. It's not close to good enough. But we do have to keep an eye on what's going on. All right. So if we look over the weekend, not an easy weekend. We see that there was a shooting of a toddler, which occurred on Saturday evening at about 7:45 p.m. on the 2000 block of North 32nd Street in the 22nd Police District. A 4-year-old black male was shot one time in the right foot. The victim was transported to Children's Hospital and placed in stable condition. No arrest by Philadelphia police at this time. It's an active investigation. Anyone with information, please contact Central Detectives at 215-686-3094. Also on Saturday afternoon, there was a different shooting at about 3:15 p.m. on the 5900 block of A Street in the 35th Police District. A 26-year-old black female was shot one time in the chest. Victim was pronounced on location by medics. Philadelphia police have made an arrest, and ADA Chesley Lightsey is here as the chief of homicide. She can answer any questions in regard to that shooting. There was also a homicide on Sunday morning at about 4:44 a.m. on the 3700 block of Aspen Street, which is in the 16th Police District. A 34-year-old black male was shot 14 times throughout his body. The victim was transported to Presbyterian Hospital, where he was later pronounced. There is no arrest at this time. The investigation is active. Anyone with information, please contact Philadelphia Police at 215-686-3334. For victims and co-victims, survivors of shootings and homicides, for communities impacted by gun violence, please feel free to reach out to our CARES unit. Our CARES unit deployed to all 7 homicides that occurred last week, providing crisis support services to each family. And those services included crisis response, supportive counseling, information referrals, and advocacy. Even though the prosecution of the murder of a 2-year-old, and we will not be using this 2-year-old's name during this court proceedings for reasons I'm sure you understand, but even though the case of Commonwealth versus Jediah Nesmith, in which there has been a conviction and a sentencing very recently, is not an example of a gun violence situation. I think it is very important for people to understand that we're really good at getting convictions in homicide cases, and we're really good at doing it without cheating, lying, and stealing. We're really good at prosecuting the right people and getting convictions, which is why we had an 85% conviction rate for gun violence right before the pandemic hit. And it is why there are a lot of people sitting in jail who engaged in gun violence who are looking at convictions, and they're looking at appropriately lengthy sentences for those gun homicides and for that gun violence. And as the courts open up, we will be able to get those cases into court. But it is an example of how good and how effective not only our homicide and non-fatal shooting unit is for shooting cases, but also for homicides in general. I can tell you that I have gone over the details of this case with our chief and also with ADA Nora Greenberg, and I think a lot of the work that was done here was truly remarkable, and they deserve a lot of credit. There were some very difficult circumstances here involving experts, among other things. It is never an easy case when you have a homicide case and therefore the victim is unavailable as a witness, but it's even harder when you're dealing with a victim who is an infant in many instances, and everyone around that infant is not there to protect that infant. Nevertheless, this office prevailed, and I have to give a lot of credit to ADA Greenberg, but also to all the leadership of the Homicide Non-Fatal Shooting Unit, including Chesley Lightsey, who is here. I'm going to call forward ADA Greenberg, who will provide information regarding charging of the defendant involved and in the shooting. But we're also going to talk about the case itself, which is the case of Jediah Nesmith. And then I will have more to say after we hear from ADA Greenberg. ADA Greenberg.
Thank you very much, DA Krasner. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nora ADA Greenberg. The case involving the Commonwealth versus Judea Naismith was an absolutely tragic case of horrific child abuse that unfortunately ended with the death of a nearly 3-year-old child. The victim was a young boy who was 2 years old and 11 months at the time of his death. In 2017, the defendant was in a relationship with the child's mother. She accepted temporary custody of this little boy in early February of 2017, and she had him in her custody for approximately a month and a half. During that period of time, the little boy suffered incredible abuse and injuries, including being deprived of food, water. He went from the 95th percentile in weight down to the 5th percentile at the time of his death. He was extremely emaciated. He had numerous contusions and other injuries about his body, numerous bone fractures. He had hemorrhaging on his brain and a variety of other injuries such that the medical examiner was only able to pronounce that the cause of death was homicidal violence because there were so many potential mechanisms for this young child's death. The defendant in this case entered into an open guilty plea in front of the Honorable Glenn Bronson to the charges of third-degree murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and related charges. She was sentenced this month to an aggregate sentence of 23 and a half to 47 years in prison as a result of her abuse and murder of this little boy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nora. And obviously, ADA Greenberg will be available for questions a little bit later. So I want to take this opportunity, since we do not have a lengthy press conference, to provide a little information on what is coming next in terms of some of these press conferences and some of the activity of the office. We will be announcing a 5th round of violence prevention grants, not this coming week, but a week after Labor Day. At our weekly community press conference, since May of 2021, the DAO has awarded $496,900 to 22 community-based organizations. Organizations interested in applying should contact the Philadelphia Foundation at grantmakingservices@philafound.org. We already have several organizations in mind. We have received increasingly large and increasingly impressive applications for these grants, as publicity about what we are doing has spread, and we are very heartened to see that. At this time, I just want to stress that if you or anyone you know suspects that child abuse may be going on, suspicion is enough. It's enough for you to inform authorities who know how to investigate these matters in ways that are appropriate, and it's enough for you to provide that information anonymously, in the sense that the people being investigated will not be informed of where it came from. The number for that, the place to start, is the Child Line, which is run by the Department of Human Services, DHS. And that Child Line is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-932-0313. That's 1-800-932-0313. Are there any questions at this time from the press? I think that I should probably have ADA Greenberg comment on it, but ultimately these decisions are mine. The buck does stop here. It has been our practice and will continue to be our practice in almost every case to offer a plea of some sort. This is a case in which a 22-year-old woman who had no prior record, and I stress the age because the U.S. Supreme Court has been quite clear that the full development of a brain ordinarily does not occur until 25. So you have someone who is young, a young defendant, and you have someone with no record whatsoever who obviously engaged in some pretty horrific conduct. That person received a sentence of 23 and a half years to 47. So we all understand what that means. It does not mean you get out of 23 and a half years. It means you will be considered for the possibility of parole at 23 and a half years. And depending upon what the parole board determines, you may do 47. It is not uncommon for people to max out or to do a lengthy sentence. If we look both nationally but also internationally, That is a lengthy, considerable, and serious sentence. There are other places. For example, in California, where a first-degree murder verdict means you will be considered automatically for parole at 25 years. If you look internationally at examples, and the example that comes to mind is a country where they have 1/9 as many homicides and 1/9 as many people in jail. Every single defendant is considered for parole after 15 years, every single one. So the answer is because it was just, and because it was appropriate, and because it made sense under the circumstances when the defendant was willing to accept her guilt, accept responsibility, and let the judge determine a sentence. It was just for her to get 23.5 to 47 years instead of pursuing a sentence of life without parole.
But DHS also aware of the stimulus abuse? Did they come up home a bunch?
Let me have ADA Greenberg answer that, if I may.
And good morning again. At the time that this case became known to authorities, DHS did not have prior involvement. This defendant did not have prior custody of children. To anybody's knowledge, there had been no prior reports. There was a DHS investigation conducted at the time, but of course the child was already deceased at that point.
You said that the defendant was in a relationship with the mother of the child. Were they living together with the child at the time that this case happened?
No, the defendant maintained a separate apartment from the child's mother, so at the time she had custody of the child, the only two people residing together were the victim and the defendant.
Can I ask about something else? There was a shooting over the weekend on Saturday night on the 4200 block of Salem Street. The 33-year-old man who was killed. Is there anything you can say about that case with the investigation into it?
Hi, good morning. Chesley Lightsey for the Commonwealth and for the DA's office. I don't have an update to offer you at this time. I am aware of the shooting. I've been in contact with detectives as it relates to that, but there's nothing that I can offer at this time, given that it's an ongoing investigation and we've not made an arrest yet.
Any sense even was this a robbery? Any kind of motive description you can provide?
I can't give anything now. If you want to send me an email, I'll see if there's more I could give you separately that would not compromise the investigation. Okay? Thanks.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just one more, but I don't want to. With just the 16-year-old who was arrested for the shooting of a police officer last week had 2 prior arrests and robbery, and then there was like a couple people I know that the captain put out in Southwest who had numerous arrests. What have your conversations been like with the commissioner as far as bail and trying to keep the people that continuously get guns on the street? What have your conversations been like? Have you had any conversations with the bail commissioner? I know in the past you've said that you've been talking to Commissioner Outlaw and the bail commissioner to try and keep the right people in jail, but it seems that they keep getting out and then getting guns and shooting.
Well, I appreciate your question. I will answer it, but I think it's important that we not confuse the 16-year-old who is accused of shooting a police officer. I think we should not confuse that with the normal adult bail process, because that's not what happens. The specifics, while I'm hesitant to get into much of the specifics about most juvenile matters, the specifics are that that young man was adjudicated. In other words, he was convicted of possessing a weapon. He was sent to a secure facility. After he was sent to a secure facility, in the juvenile system, it is judges who determine when it's appropriate for you to come out of those facilities, depending upon your progress. He came out of the facility after a judge determined that there was good progress. And of course, the terrible shooting of this officer occurred after that. This was not a situation where somebody was on bail. Bail had nothing to do with that situation. But I certainly accept it's an important question more broadly, what's going on with bail. So unfortunately, neither the police commissioner nor the DA's office controls bail. We have worked, I think, well and collaboratively in terms of getting better information from the Philadelphia Police Department. A lot of that is owed to what Chance Lee, who runs our intelligence unit, has been able to accomplish with people within the police department who have been increasingly helpful and cooperative with getting us that information. But ultimately, we don't set the bail. We go in front of bail commissioners or judges, depending on whether it's the beginning of a case or you're in the middle of a case, and we make our argument, and so does the defense, and judges make that determination. We are of the opinion that in many instances, the bails that are being set for shootings, the bails that are being set for really troubling cases involving guns, and that the bails that are even being set for other crimes, for example, there was a terrible beatdown of a man in South Philly, which left him in a coma and resulted in a bail of $25,000 when we asked for $999,999. I find that really troubling. We have had many conversations with the president judge of the municipal court, who is the appropriate figure to speak to in relation to the situation that's going on. We've presented them data. We've shown them the issues. But I also think we need to be fair in talking about this. The pandemic has not made these decisions easy for anyone. So while I am very frustrated because I do not believe that we're getting the results we should get, and I think cash bail is the problem, and the elimination of cash bail and its replacement with a system where you're either held because you're that much of a danger, as they have done in Washington, D.C. for 30 years, or you're released and money's got nothing to do with it because you're not that much of a danger. That's the real answer. It is frustrating. Have I talked to the police commissioner about it? Yes, but with the understanding that she doesn't set bail, and neither do I, and that we've had some good progress in cooperating the exchange of information. I mean, I don't want to get into exactly what case it was, but we had a case recently where we had a whole memo, or as they like to say, a product, meaning a multi-page white paper that explained specifics about why we believed a particular defendant was especially dangerous. And it included a group of social media shots in relation to that young man. And when we went to argue for bail, meaning a very high bail in that case, and we tried to pass it up to the bail commissioner, he told us not to. No, don't need it. That is very, very unfortunate and very troubling.
So are you regularly talking to the commissioner and trying to kind of right or wrong here when you have people that pick up guns 6, 7 times?
For us to talk to bail commissioners alone would be improper and unethical. That would be ex parte communications. We speak to the president judge of municipal court, who is the one who has the greatest control over their hirings, their firings, and any sort of educational information that would happen on the inside. We remain frustrated with some of these outcomes, but we also know that there is independence in the judiciary, even when some of the bail commissioners are not experienced in criminal justice. Some of them are not even lawyers. We have to, and we do respect their lane, which is that it is somewhat independent. We would love to see a change in all of that, but the real change has to be the elimination of cash bail and its replacement, as is happening all over the country, actually, with a more sensible system. Are there any other questions? All right, there being no further questions, thank you all very much.